Welcome to the TC podcast, where we believe there's no such thing as secular and that the DC Extended Universe deserves some attention too. I'm Josh Larson, editor at thinkchristian.net, your host. And yeah, it's true. We tend to be Marvel heavy on the show, given all of the streaming episodes and series and movies that the MCU produces. But we like to keep tabs on the DC Comics universe as well, and that's our plan today with The Suicide Squad. It's currently in theaters and also on HBO Max. Now, if you know the gist of the comic, basically about supervillains who are put together on a team by this government agency in exchange for lighter prison sentences, well, it might not seem like a natural pairing for the theme of this show, which is Heroes of the Faith. That phrase is familiar to a lot of us. I think there was a Heroes of the Faith book set, something else called Christian Heroes, some of those for young readers, celebrating prominent Christians across history. And of course, the phrase also often refers to Hebrews 11, where we get a list of biblical heroes, Abel, Abraham, and others. So as Christians, how are we to think about heroes and heroism? Well, in 2008, on our partner program, the Today Daily Devotional, Jimmy Lynn wrote this: "A true hero will sacrifice for others. A true hero will not boast about himself. Jesus died for us while we were still rebelling against him and living in sin. That makes him the ultimate superhero." Well, today, we're considering characters in these movies who would either never claim to be the ultimate superheroes or struggle mightily under the title of hero. It's the Suicide Squad and the Green Knight. Perhaps the anti-heroism of those tales will help us define what heroism looks like, particularly for Christians. Joe George and Claude are going to be joining me to discuss. Now, real quick, before we dive in, I want to give you a heads up on something new we're going to be doing here at Think Christian. It's the TC Movie Club. This is basically an online discussion group that I'm going to be hosting, and it'll be centered around a series of video essays that I'm also making. More details will be coming, but for right now, I can tell you that our first series is going to center on the films of Joel and Ethan Coen. So I'm really excited about this. It's the TC Movie Club. Everyone is welcome to join. Don't miss out on the details as we start putting those out. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Think Christian, or just subscribe to receive our emails at thinkchristian.net/subscribe. We'll be sure to get the word out that way too. Okay, back to this question of heroism. Let's start with the Suicide Squad and Joe George, who has some superhero credentials of his own. Joe George is here. And Joe, I would have had you on the show to discuss the Suicide Squad, even if you weren't writing a book offering a theology of superheroes. That is, though, indeed the case. And you haven't been with us since you announced this. So give us the details about the book.
Well, it's going to be kind of an expansion of what we've been doing at TC, just focusing entirely on superhero movies. I'm going to cover them all from Superman the movie in 79 to, I mean, depending when I finish this darn manuscript, they're all coming out right now. So
yeah. It never ends. So I don't know how you do that with a book, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I sold it to them, I was like, I'm going to do up to date. And at that time, Birds of Prey was the up to date. And since then, we've had like 5 more. And, I'm really into superhero movies, but when I have to write a book about them, that's when the fatigue starts to set in for me.
Okay. All right.
Otherwise, but it's going to be that. It's going to talk about kind of what we do here, the themes of the movies, and then address how Christian theology speaks to those themes, sometimes in concert, sometimes talking back to it, and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Can't wait. So the superpowers and the glory. And do you have a tentative publication date, or is that still up in the air?
Next year, sometime. I got to finish the manuscript. They've given me the end of this year. So,
okay, nice. So can we say sometime during, what is it, Marvel Phase 4? Is that what we're in now, or something like that?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay, we'll
hopefully
look for
before
it then.
Phase 6. That's what we'll shoot for.
Good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, let's switch over to DC here and talk the Suicide Squad. Maybe you can explain for us, Joe, why there is a "the" in the title to this film, and then tell us what you thought about it.
Oh gosh, I cannot explain the other than maybe it was like a let's forget about that first one that came out in 2016 and this is going to be the definitive. You kind of feel that a little bit. Yeah, and I rewatched that 2016 one and I'm okay with forgetting about it. But I haven't read your review yet, but I saw you tweeting about it. It seems like you're not as up on this movie maybe as I am, but
Well, let me hear how high you are on it, and
okay.
I can tell you.
Honestly, I'm not sure. Like, I like
Okay.
it. Like, I like superheroes. I like gory things, and so the gore worked for me. I am the one of maybe 3 people on the face of this planet who walked into the movie knowing who Javelin and Blackguard were from the comic books. So I appreciate these deep pulls. And
Hmm.
for the most part, I liked it. You know, it's funny. It's incredibly well constructed. You know, the action sequence are well constructed. I think the acting is pretty solid across the board. So all that's good. The story mostly works. The part that I have hesitation about, and I think we'll get into this, is tonally, I don't know that it entirely works. It asks us to sympathize sometimes with even the most sympathetic characters do some pretty nasty things. And I don't think
Yep.
it quite lands that the way that it wants to, in a way that I kind of feel outside of, because I feel like people are 100% up on it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
but it's a little bit of a nasty movie. And I don't think people are taking that into account.
Yeah. I think that's accurate. If I've been calling, this kind of subgenre the kill shot comedy, where a lot of the humor is the punchline is the death, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
depending on your tolerance or understanding of that sort of comedy, you're either going to think this is great because you get a lot of that, or it is going to leave you a little queasy.
Yeah.
And I'm, along with you, where I maybe obviously have a little bit of qualms about those sorts of comedies, but I also recognize, especially compared to the 2016 Suicide Squad, the stuff you mentioned, the humor, the characterization, the character-based humor is much more solid. Just like the storytelling, it's just overall a more competently made film. The director this
That's
time,
exactly
James Gunn, who made the 2 Guardians of the Galaxy films over in the MCU. And I think,
Mhm.
that speaks to the tone as well. I found those are like mid to lower level MCU for me because of just what we're talking about, sort of the gleefulness
Hmm.
that can be brought to some of the violence in those
Yeah.
movies. And then, as this one does as well, kind of tries to have it both ways, but it's definitely tied to how we view these characters, which is what makes it
Yeah.
interesting to talk about this under the idea of heroes. You take someone like Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, who she's very good here, funny,
Yeah.
an acrobatic performance. She brings a ton of personality to the film, and a really provocative figure in terms of how much we should be rooting for these villains, these villainous characters. And so let's get into this idea of heroes. And
Yeah.
when we think of, biblical heroes, we often turn to Hebrews 11, gives us that list of people. If you look at that list, most of those people, they're heroic in spite of themselves, okay? If you think of someone like
Mhm.
Samson, maybe David, Sarah initially laughing at God's plan. So thinking about the Suicide Squad in light of that, Joe, do you think that applies here? Are like those biblical figures, can we say that these are anti-heroes who save the day despite a whole bunch of other R-rated stuff that they're engaging in? Is there something we can maybe grasp onto there, or should we maybe not be too quick to make that comparison?
I think yes and no is going to be the dodge I'm going to make. That no, there isn't, in the sense of the way that these characters have faith and the way that the faith pours out. That the Harley Quinn character is a really good example of this. That she is mentally ill. She has a particular worldview, and there's one scene. I don't want to give it away, but she kind of gets her own story, her own little side mission, and it's a romance princess plot. And there is one scene where you think it's going to go one way, and it goes quickly in the opposite direction, an act of violence on her part. And
Mhm.
the movie is clearly on her side. And the way that the movie gets us on her side is by making the person who she committed the act of violence against that much worse. Like
Yeah, more
there's
of a
an
villain.
more of a villain. There's an inherent cynicism that kind of is in this movie that asks you to be like, yeah, our heroes are bad, but the people they're killing are betterer. So it's okay. And so that aspect, I don't think quite applies on the Hebrews level, because there's a nihilism to it that I don't think
Mm,
we as Christians can entirely tap into, where it's okay that bad people do bad things because there's worse people against the going
right.
to do that. So that level, it doesn't work. However, the one way that it works you kind of have to squint at some parts of it, but I think it works, is the differences between the types of faith that the characters have. The Bloodsport, the character played by Idris Elba, who is our sort of protagonist of this one. I mean, it's very ensemble, but our sort of protagonist begins the movie sure of himself and his abilities to kill people. And that's it. He has a charged scene with his daughter, played by Storm Reed, which I thought was fantastically performed and written, where he's saying some awful things to his daughter about how he doesn't want her in his life, how she should just go away and not be part of it. And he kind of spends the entire movie, he does his actions because he's sort of forced in for the sake of her, but he spends most of the movie very assured of his faith in himself. And in fact, one of the best scenes, if you're into the gallows humor, is him and the Peacemaker, played by John Cena, killing a bunch of people trying to one up one another, and
yes,
that's a good example of their faith in themselves.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I think the movie does want us to look at that as, cool, but also bankrupt on a certain way. There's a higher level of faith that it's going towards. Then you've got the Peacemaker and Rick Flag, Joel Kinnaman's character, and really Viola Davis's character, Amanda Waller, they work for the American government, and they have faith in the United States. And there is a sort of, not strong, but it's there. Maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe it should be strengthened. I don't know. But kind of a comment about American imperialism kind of going on there, because this mission happens in a Latin American country that's been destabilized by a coup. So there's that going on there. And I won't give it away, but throughout the movie, they have their faith in the United States questioned, right? Like that's not a higher good. Then finally, the one place where I think it does work, and we can look at it biblically, is with let me get her name totally right because I'm not familiar with it before this. Daniela Melchior plays Ratcatcher 2. She is the daughter of the first rat catcher, who has this ability, this machine that allows him to control the minds of rats. And so she controls rats. And unlike the rest, she's there because she got picked up in prison because she was robbing to get food, and she was using the rats, and that was considered armed robbery. And we get the sense that Amanda Waller kind of stuck her in here to use her powers.
Yeah.
There is a scene midway through where King Shark, who is a semi-intelligent man shark, voiced by Sylvester Stallone, tries to eat her, and while she's sleeping. And then she wakes up and basically says, I don't think he would actually hurt me. And she has this moment where she reaches out her hand to touch his hand. And I've seen all of James Gunn's movies. I saw the way this movie began. I was 50% sure, at least, that he was going to rip off her arm and something terrible was going to happen. And so I bought the danger that this is going to be one of those kill jokes that you were talking about. And instead, she kind of comes out throughout the movie, the one that's constantly saying the weak things, the small things, the dejected things, they are the ones that you need to care for. And that ends up giving, to the big climax. That's basically how they win. And so if you squint at all the times that she kills people with rats, then you can kind of see that there.
Right. I like that. I like that distinction. And I also like that you're talking about in terms of faith, because that phrase is crucial to Hebrews 11, right? By faith.
Yes.
All those figures listed there, they're credited with doing what they did by faith. So trust in God, not in their own abilities. And probably Ratcatcher 2 is closer to something akin to that than most everyone else we see, who very much trusts in their own abilities. Maybe the one moment I was thinking of where you could apply it to Bloodsport, the Idris Elba character is, and maybe this is more Providence coming into play, but I love during the action climax, the building they're all in is collapsing. And it happens in such a way so that Bloodsport lands in like just the right place at just the right time to do something actually heroic. It's not necessarily one of these jokey kill shots. It's something a little more noble. And I like how he's brought there outside of his own abilities. So there's maybe a moment there that kind of applies to what you're talking about. But I do want to go back to Harley Quinn, because I loved what you were saying about her. Your description of the reality that there's always a worse villain so that we will root for her pretty much defines her standalone movie, Birds of Prey, I think, which I like. I actually like Birds of Prey better than the Suicide Squad, but it has that same issue where we root for her because in that case, the Ewan McGregor villain is so much worse.
Yeah.
So that's at play here. But it also makes me wonder, if we're talking about what does heroism look like, if it's helpful to think about where do these characters end up, or do they move anywhere in the film, somewhere that's
Mm,
closer to the sort of heroism, sort of biblical heroes we talk about with Hebrews 11. And so if they're the same criminals as they were before, then obviously there's been no movement.
mhm,
If they've happened to participate in redemptive acts rather than been changed and turned towards a redemptive existence, then it's kind of, that's not the sort of heroism we're talking about. So this brings me back to Harley Quinn. Whether she
mhm.
just happens to participate in some acts that are redemptive in the larger scheme of this plot, or if she's been changed at all and turned towards a redemptive existence. And I think her mental illness is a huge part of this. And I'm glad
Mhm.
that the movie recognizes that and actually has that as a part of her character. There is a sequence where it's a little bit after the one you were talking about, where she's in a hallway and taking on a bunch of worse guys, not bad guys, worse
Mhm.
guys, I guess we could say. At least that's how the movie
Yeah,
wants us
sure.
to see them, maybe. And she's shooting them and attacking them. And rather than blood spurting, as has been happening throughout this film, flowers kind of emerge from
Mhm.
their wounds. And it's this incredibly striking sequence that I really did not know what to do with in the moment, except kind of appreciate the aesthetics and feeling a little bad
Mhm.
about appreciating the aesthetics. And then even later thinking about, so what is that saying? And it was actually my older daughter who was helpful when she had seen it as well. And she was talking about relating it to showing us how damaged she has been and how
Mhm.
traumatized she's been by her own experiences, tying into her mental illness, where she's lost touch with reality in such a way she doesn't even see this really as blood or
Yeah.
gore. She's seen this act as something that's beautiful. Now, obviously, that's not a redemptive act that we're witnessing. So I'd love to get your take just on that scene and that sequence. And maybe it doesn't fit into our conversation at all, but for me, it was one of the most striking moments in The Suicide Squad.
Absolutely, and I read it the same way you do, that this is her perspective. She sees this as she's a Disney princess, and we get very Disney style birds that
Yes.
would like land on Snow White's hands, coming with the flowers that are popping on there. And so I read that as she is deranged, she's out of touch with reality, and maybe we shouldn't hold her completely responsible for
Mm.
the killing that she's doing, which is helped by their worst guys. For me, though, I saw steps of the redemption in, I guess, the scene before that I was mentioning before. I mean, it's done as a comic scene, but she's talking about how she's had really bad experiences with men, which is, we know that from the previous films, that her origin story is she was mentally and physically abused by the Joker.
Right.
And so, yes. And she's saying, I told myself I would look out for red flags. And the way that escalates, what she does with the red flags is maybe we wouldn't go along with that, but that, as somebody who has mental illness himself, those are good steps that she's taken to
Mm.
look out for red flags, to be aware of yourself. And I tend to agree with you that I prefer Birds of Prey, the previous one, and Birds of Prey did a lot more to advance her character than this one does. But that was the one spot where I felt like she's moved forward just a little bit. And especially when you take that into the end of the movie, again, we're kind of talking around it here, but I hesitate to call it redemptive because linking violence to redemption is, especially for Christians, is a whole can
Yeah.
of worms. But she is the one that recognizes, I think, even before Ratcatcher 2, that they can do something to help people, and she's willing to do it. And she
Mm.
gets another sort of gross, beautiful payoff towards the end, which I don't know how much we want to get into, but it does involve eye trauma that somehow looks very pretty in here.
Yes, yes.
And so
It's a
at that point
recurring
there,
theme, I think, that he's somehow Gunn is somehow making like this really violent, gory stuff in some way beautiful as well, which is another point of conflict for me.
yeah, I don't know what to do with that. But we can read that as at least a different perspective, that kind of like Ratcatcher 2 is, again, that the small things matter,
Mm.
which, again, when we're talking about a superhero movie, that gets iffy because often these are power fantasies and it means punching. But there is something biblical in the fact that those small things matter, and those are the things that tend to be better attuned to the work that God's doing, as opposed to, the chariots and the spheres and the arrows and that sort of thing. So I can
Yeah.
see it there a little bit with Harley. It takes some little bit of squinting though for me as well.
And I like how you're describing, it makes me think we should approach her more as a character that we're not expecting to do the right things, but someone who's
Right.
in a really damaged place. And instead, maybe we're just rooting for her to get healthier within this superhero construct that she finds herself in. So yeah, she's
Yeah.
definitely, I don't know what future plans are, if there are any, in fact, for Margot Robbie to continue with this character, but I'd be most interested probably in following her story in the future.
Yep.
So you danced around the finale a little bit, which I think we should, because I actually enjoyed it. I think it kind of goes to a really surprising place that was pretty rewarding. But is there anything else you think we should touch on from the film without spoiling, or you think we covered it pretty well?
I think we covered it. I mean, I can't recommend it to everybody, but you'll know within 10 minutes. If those first 10 minutes bother you, then you can go ahead and turn that off.
Absolutely. And speaking of the first
Yeah.
10 minutes and characters that I really appreciated, I could have used a lot more Weasel. We'll just leave it at that. But I was,
Okay.
kind of left wanting in the Weasel department based on what we saw
Well,
at the beginning. So
they say they want to leave you wanting Weasel, so that's good
That's-
show business,
that's
I
just-
suppose.
that's an old show business term. Yeah, you're right.
That's almost, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Joe. We do have on the TC website, thinkchristian.net, we have a roundup article collecting all of our DC Extended Universe posts because we've actually done a fair amount of them. So we'll link to that in the show notes. Again, I encourage listeners to keep an eye out for Joe's book, The Superpowers and the Glory, and root for him as he races towards that deadline. So all the best as you do
Yes.
that. All right, Joe?
Thoughts and prayers, please. Yeah. Thanks, Josh.
You got it.
Hey there, JJT here, your jukebox hero, I hope, or maybe just your playlist hero. And if you had been listening to this anywhere but on YouTube, you would have just heard one of my heroes, Willie Nelson, with his version of My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys, just one of more than 30 songs that I've pulled together around this theme of heroes. It's a good mix, if I do say so myself, in that these songs do a lot more than merely celebrate traditional superheroes. They question the concept, in fact, of heroism and point toward what we really need as we gravitate towards these larger-than-life rescuers. You can find it all by searching for the Think Christian playlist on Spotify or checking the link in the emails you get from us, or just head over to the website. And if you've got a suggestion, be a hero and tweet it at me at John J. Thompson, and I just might add it to the list. Until next time, this is JJT encouraging you to be the hero you want to see in the world. Peace.
It's raining books here on the TC podcast. First, Joe George let us know about the superpowers and the glory. Now, Claude Acho is here, and I know he recently turned in the manuscript for his book project. I bet that felt good, Claude. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it felt really good. My book is focusing on how African American literature can make our faith more whole and just. And so that book and title and cover, all that stuff is coming pretty soon, and it'll be out with Brazos Press in summer 2022. So really just looking at classic African American literature and what we can learn about that in terms of thinking more sharply theologically, but also living more faithfully as disciples. So yeah, it feels good. I'm excited.
That's great. Less than a year away. Do you have the title narrowed down, or are you still in the process of that?
Yeah, I think the title is nailed, but I haven't shared it anywhere. So I'm just I want to
We'll stay in
gotta ask and
suspense.
see. Yeah, we'll stay in suspense, but maybe we'll break it here. Then that'll be incentive to get me back on again now that I'm done writing.
I like that. I like your
Yeah.
thinking there. All right. Well, you are here to talk movies, not literature, although I guess sort of literature, because The Green
It's
Knight
true.
is this loose adaptation of a 14th century poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The movie is written and directed by David Lowery. He made Ghost Story. Pete's Dragon remake was also his, handful of other movies. Stars a very entertaining Dev Patel, who plays Gawain. Gawain, I've heard it pronounced so many different ways.
Garwin.
Garwin, yes, we can go whatever direction you want. Maybe I'll let you fill in the rest of the plot, Claude, and then tell me what you thought about the Green Knight.
Yeah, so Garwin or Gawain is the nephew of the king, Arthur, and the movie really starts with him Yeah, just kind of a wanderer, a wanderer, and then is invited to the king's court, really pushed there by his mother, and then he takes on this challenge with the Green Knight that sets him on this quest to really see what kind of, if he's truly a person of honor and virtue. And so the sort of game idea at the heart of the movie is, will anyone stand and inflict a wound on the Green Knight, knowing that whatever wound you inflict on the knight will be returned to you in a year's time. And Gawain steps up to that and then has to journey into the ramifications of that challenge.
Yeah, so that year comes around fairly early in the film, and then he does set out on that quest to
Yes.
meet the Green Knight again. And it is kind of a dizzying film. It's a mystical film. It left me in a little bit of a daze. I didn't have my bearings during the whole thing, but I was sort of happily lost, I think I could say. I wasn't like ever frustrated in confusion. Did you have a similar experience?
I did. I think, pretty quickly watching, I just realized, okay, this is a movie that is going to demand more from me than a lot of other movies do. Like this is a movie that's asking for my engagement with a lot of insights and themes and things that are happening, but they're not brought to the surface. They're there for you to latch a hold of, but you have to work too. So I think dreamlike, you may have just mentioned, I think is a really to describe it. So I enjoyed it. I felt like I was being brought into this world, into this meditation on a lot of these different themes.
Yeah, meditation is a good word. I would encourage people, if they haven't seen it yet, not to feel pressure, even though all that is true, but not to feel pressure during the movie to kind of figure everything out or make those connections or even identify those themes. Because the more I let that go and just kind of immerse myself in just the colors of this and the landscapes and some of the imagery, there's plenty of time to think about all that stuff later and
Yes,
talk about it
yes.
later. This is a good talking movie, so I think we should do that. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. As you've already alluded to, Claude, it's very much a movie about heroism. So about what defines a hero. How do you become a hero? How is Gawain going to respond to when he accepts that challenge for the night? It kind of puts him in this new place towards knighthood, which we get a sense early on is something he's resisted. So these are all questions circulating around the film. And maybe we should back up a little bit away from the film here and talk about some of those questions from a Christian perspective here to lay the foundation. If you think about heroes of the faith, Claude, that sort of idea, I'm wondering what qualities come to mind for you. And then maybe we can travel from there. You can travel from those qualities and let me know if you see any of those displayed by Gawain in The Green Knight.
Yeah, I think when we think heroes in the faith, we can immediately go to people who embody the fruit of the spirit, people who are holy, virtuous, disciplined, faithful in following Jesus towards his kingdom. But then when I think about actually like heroes of the faith in terms of like biblical characters and just kind of more like reality and grit as it is, it's more, I think more of like people who are not that, but then get caught up in God's story. That's really what I think of, like
Okay.
people who kind of get caught up in the tidal waves of God's movement in the world, whether they're ready or they're not. And then it's really through that journey and that transformation that God works in people that they begin to emerge with the characteristics that we first think of when we think of heroes of the faith, right? They don't usually start that way, and I think that obviously draws into hero's journey and all that sort of stuff. So, I think of people who risk in faith. I think of people who are caught up in what God is doing and then struggle, but struggle responsively. They respond to God's initiative, God's movement, God's work. I think of like Moses, right? Like who lashes out in violence, but then is formed and then steps into the story, right? And then embodies these virtues and then struggles along the way. I think of Hebrews 11, just kind of operating in faith, yeah, despite all of the flaws and struggles of the people. So, when I think about that, and then I think about the movie and the journey that Gawain takes, the first thing you think of is his decision to say, okay, I'm the one. I'll stand up and challenge the Green Knight. I'll be the one, even though I'm really not part of this court. I'm a nobody. I was just in a brothel, and just got put here by my mom.
Yeah.
And so, and it really depends on how you want to read that moment. Is that a moment of heroism and stepping into the story out of virtue, or is that a moment of sort of seeking personal greatness and excess? Right, like the knight tells him, whatever wound you inflict on me, I'll inflict on you. And he doesn't have to inflict the sort of wound that he chooses to inflict. So is that excess? Is that heroism? Is that like what actually is happening there? And I think that's what's so fascinating about the movie and makes it so worthwhile to me is that it doesn't offer easy answers to those sorts of questions. So when when I think of a hero, in the Christian story, I think of somebody caught up in God's story and that they respond to that and they're transformed along the way.
Yeah. And so the question then becomes, how much do we feel Gawain is transformed at the end of this journey, which is maybe getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. We can maybe in a bit touch on the ending, but you're right. There are so many different ways to interpret this. I had not thought about, the blow that he decides to inflict on the Green Knight, and as excessive, but I think that's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, I like your definition of heroism and biblical heroism. I was kind of, Googling around for this and looking at some of our resources here at Reframe Ministries for some background and came across a blog post on Family Fire. It's a partner program of ours where Deb Coster wrote, this was just last year, about heroism and what it means in the context of the Christian family. And she kind of highlighted 3 qualities of a hero of faith. And I think you touched on some of these, Claude, but humility, she highlighted, self-sacrifice, and then obedience. I'm actually going to read a little bit of Deb's post here. She wrote, "We all have the opportunity to step up and be the heroes in the places where God has placed us. We can guide our families." That speaks to what you were saying, Claude. "We can guide our families by our servant leadership to be champions for bringing in God's kingdom. We are placed in our families for a purpose. As we live in humility and love others sacrificially, we are a part of God's kingdom being built on this earth. We are called to love God with all of our being and to communicate God's love to the next generation. That's our mission in our everyday going. We are making disciples by sharing the love that Jesus has shown to us." So yeah, right. A couple of things there really echo what you were just saying about us being placed in God's story. And I don't know, I want to hear more from you because my sense is you might have a more positive take on Gawain's journey than I did from watching this film, especially when I think about these qualities that Deb highlighted. I mean, if you talk about humility, my reading of that opening was that it's more pride that led to his confronting the Green Knight. As you said, it wasn't really his place. Now, the knights who were around that table they seem not to want any part of it. So there's an opening there that he steps into.
Right.
And you're right. We could read it either way. We could read it as he's stepping up to the challenge, or is it kind of like him trying to take something on he's not really ready for? Yeah. And how about self-sacrifice? The question, what is he pursuing in this quest? Is it glory? And if it is it, just glory for himself? Is there any of this he's doing for the good of others? I guess I asked myself. And then obedience, the last quality Deb wrote about. He seems to think he's doing the right thing at the end of the film, but is he, or is he doing it for the right reasons? So I don't know. Maybe you're more in the middle, and it's like an interesting question for you whether Gawain does make any sort of transformation in the way you're talking about. But if you had to pick between transformation and sort of just floundering about, where do you think you'd fall?
Man, that's difficult because I do think initially I came out of the film thinking more cautionary tale a little bit. I think that, but I think the movie, without spoiling the end, I think the movie wants to suggest something more transformative. But there's a lot of points, throughout his journey, and the way the movie's broken up is almost kind of like these chapters. And, there's moments where he encounters different other people, and including a woman in her home, and there's this interesting there's a few different things where it's like, oh, that he doesn't seem to have honor, he doesn't seem to be a person of honor. You know, there's this sort of she invites him to complete to do something for her that would serve her, and I think he asks, what would you offer me exchange? And then she goes, why would you ask me that? Why would you even ask me that? Is the response, in these different moments. And, people will, there's different exchanges what does it mean to be a knight? And he doesn't know. And someone says, oh, you're not very good with questions, or and all these sort of things where it's he doesn't seem to know what he's doing. And I think there's something really interesting about restraint and sacrifice and virtue, even regards to sensuality in the movie. And he really struggles there as well. So I don't know. I'm not overwhelmingly positive on him and his journey. I'm still I left that movie texting a bunch of friends that had seen it and being like, what do you think? And and I was like, I need to watch this again, to the point of humility and sacrifice. I think there's an interesting thread between greatness and goodness. He seems to want greatness, but he's not he doesn't recognize goodness. Like you can be good and honorable without having the greatness of being a knight. And I think he seems to, at least initially, want the visible greatness and the glory without having the actual goodness of character. And and then the parallels to that, and so much in the Christian life and the church today, and is obviously very stark and direct. So I don't know. I can't answer your question, man. We got to go watch it again.
I'm totally planning on doing that. So yeah, part two of this discussion maybe at some point. But I love that distinction of greatness and goodness. And yeah, the ending, I could come away from that second viewing of the last 30 seconds and have a completely different impression, because it's coming at you so fast and you're processing so much. But my instinct was, again, we won't give it away. My instinct was that the last line itself almost was kind of like a punchline. And to me, I took it as, a little bit more of a negative view of this character and his journey, but you could also totally read it. Depending on how you read the pronouncement of that line could skew the way you take in the whole movie. And I love films like that, where it's kind of, it's purposefully left in the air, right?
Yes. Yeah, which is why it's such a good movie to discuss. And I've just been texting with friends about it, from last night through today, and just sort of, even a friend had suggested, and again I was like, I got to watch this again, because a friend had suggested Darwin. How is his mother really the king's sister, right? Or is there something maybe a little bit covered up or illegitimate happening there that would then change the way you would read the rest of the story? The lady that tests him towards the end is played by the same actress that plays his kind of common, soulmate at the beginning, that that he's torn between, and she's the one that introduces the idea of goodness to him. And so there's all these different things. So I was just like, man, this was really good. I need one more viewing.
Yeah, his mother, a couple roles you mentioned there. His mother, played by Sarita Chowdhury, who is really great. She's kind of like, if you look back at Arthurian legend, I think sort of meant to be a bit the Morgana character. She's something of a sorceress or a witch. Totally compelling, trying to figure out what her role might be. And then Alicia Vikander plays the other woman you mentioned, who it's a double role actually that she has. She's so good, has a great speech as this lady he encounters at a castle in the wilderness about greenery and how the efforts of mankind will always fall away in the face of nature, which will eventually overtake anything man builds. And there's so many layers there about, just the futility of humankind's efforts compared from a cosmic perspective, whether that's a pagan perspective, which a lot of this movie delves in, or a Christian perspective, which there is a lot in the picture too. This opens on Christmas Day, right? So so much going on here. And I don't know, is there anything, any of those directions you wanted to bring something up in regards to, or just anything else about the film, Claude, that stood out to you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
I guess just many other questions, but I feel like we've hit some of the heart of those. And I guess I'd ask you. I was even just trying to recapture in my mind just sort of the movements of the story. Did you and so I went back to Wikipedia just to make sure I had the flow after I had seen it, and there was something there about a post-credit scene.
Yeah.
And
did you stick around for that?
I didn't stick around for that. I didn't stick around for that. I mean, I should have. I was the only person in the theater, so I should have just stayed.
Yeah,
but
right.
I think somebody came in to kind of clear, to make sure the one person was leaving, so I got up and left during the credits. So
I will say, when you go see it again, it's worth sticking around for, but it didn't really alter anything I'd experienced or necessarily answer any of the questions I had.
Okay.
So
Good.
you're
Very
probably
good.
okay. But yeah, for you, if you see it again, and others, if they are going out to see it now, definitely stick around for that, because it is interesting. It's an interesting touch. Well, thank you, Claude, for coming on to talk. It was good to reconnect with you. Congrats again on the manuscript. I will say, for listeners, we don't know the title yet, but we can prepare. I got the list from you, Claude, a while back of books you were going to write about. So since then, I've read Passing for the first time, and I've read Invisible Man for the first time, which of course are classics I should have read a long time ago, but this was the impetus. So I cannot wait to see what you write about those two books in your book when it does come out. And I hope we can get you writing a bit more now that maybe there's a window between now and your edits where we can get you to write for the TC website.
Man, I appreciate that. Well, let's do this because I'm pretty sure I do have permission. We can just, if people are listening to this and listening to this point, we can tell them the title. How about that? We can tell them.
Oh, I like that. A reward.
Yeah, it's a reward. It's going to be called "Reading Black Books: How African American Literature Can Make Our Faith More Whole and Just." So I slipped the subtitle in early. If people are paying attention, now you get the full title and cover and all that's coming soon. So yeah, appreciate the love, and yeah, great to converse with you.
Sounds great. Can't wait to read it. All right. We'll talk again soon, Claude. Take care.
Thanks.
Seeking greatness or living within God's goodness. Maybe that's the distinction, as Claude suggested, between a hero and a hero of the faith. For more hero talk, and especially if you have kids, our partner program, another one of ours, Kids Corner, they did a series about heroes on their narrative podcast. You can find that at kidscorner.net. We'll also link to it in the show notes for those of you who are looking for another media ministry resource for your kids. Of course, there's tons of superhero content on the TC website, thinkchristian.net, including that handy roundup of our posts on DCEU films. Thanks to Joe George for pulling DC duty on this episode. You can follow him on Twitter at JAGeorge2. And Claude Acho, who talked Green Knight, is at Claude Acho. Follow them both for updates on their forthcoming books. If you want to follow us, at Think Christian is where you can find us on Facebook and Twitter. Now, for our YouTube viewers, you missed out on a couple of tracks that John J. Thompson selected from his Spotify playlist to accompany this episode. I love that John donned his Think Christian t-shirt this time. You can find his playlist by searching for the Think Christian playlist over on Spotify. One more quick thing. We could still use some fresh reviews of the show over on Apple Podcasts. A couple sentences would be great. Give us a star rating. That way it raises our profile and we can hopefully find some new listeners. So thanks in advance for doing that. The Think Christian podcast is a listener-supported ministry and program of Reframe Ministries. That's a family of programs designed to help you see your whole life reframed by God's gospel story. More information can be found at reframeministries.org. Our audio engineer and post-production supervisor is John Reeder, and Reframe's co-director overseeing content strategy is Robin Basley. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks to consider how another corner of our pop culture fandom connects with our faith.